Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about whether a traditional wheelchair or a 2-in-1 rollator wheelchair combination is better. For the sake of the video, I'm going to assume that the person I'm talking to is an ambulatory wheelchair user and probably like a light wheelchair user, so not in the house, not at all times, but when they go out and have to walk distances, maybe you don't mind standing up for short periods, you like to wander around shops but you get too tired, you run out of energy quickly, but walking itself is fine for very short periods. I'm assuming that mainly because that's how I am, this is my experience, and I feel like my kind of recommendations or pros and cons really probably can't be widely applied. People with different experiences probably have very different needs and wants for their mobility aids. So this is very specifically ambulatory wheelchair users with probably like energy or fatigue issues, or maybe pain instead, or with both, and you want a mobility aid to help you out and about. Seagulls are going crazy. You want a mobility aid to help you get out and about and go out more, and you're not really sure what type would be best for you, so that's what I'm going to talk about. So a little bit of background with my history with these two mobility aids. I became chronically ill a long time ago, and for a long time I had no mobility aids at all. I then got my first walking stick, and it was kind of a catalyst for everything else. I loved the walking stick. I still love having my walking stick, but it doesn't do enough. I needed somewhere to sit. I needed to not have to walk everywhere. It gave me security and stability, but it just didn't do enough. So I started looking into wheelchairs, which is how I ended up with this, the I-GO Airrex wheelchair, self-propelled wheelchair in grey or whatever. I got to this because I wanted something that wasn't horribly ugly, which it's kind of middle of the road in terms of wheelchairs. I wanted self-propelled wheels. I was very specific. I definitely wanted self-propelled wheels because I wanted the freedom to be able to move myself around in shops, and I wanted it to be a reasonable price. I think a couple of years ago I paid 200 something for it, and now it's probably gone up because of inflation, but it was a reasonable price as well. It was something that I felt I could spend the money on, and I think this is a great wheelchair. I very much enjoyed using this wheelchair for the couple of years that I used it for. It's very functional. It took me where I needed to be. It was easy for people to use, easy for people to push, easy for people to get used to the folding down and setting back up system. It was overall, it was a completely functional item, and I think it's really good. And if you are looking for a kind of a beginner wheelchair in this kind of style, I think this is a great one. I didn't have a lot of complaints really when I used it, but then about a year ago I worked on a video with Rollz, and they gave me their Rollz Motion 2-in-1 wheelchair so that I could make the video, and since I got this I haven't used this one at all. This is the Rollz Motion 2-in-1 rollator and wheelchair in candy pink. I did get this for free in exchange for the video, so I didn't spend my own money on it, but since this has been my everyday wheelchair, this basically comes with me wherever, and I kind of don't think about the traditional wheelchair a lot anymore. It lives in my parents' garage. It's kind of gross now because it's just been abandoned there, and this has become my main thing. So let's talk about the specific details that make them different. The main thing is that this is a wheelchair, and this is a wheelchair and a rollator. So a rollator is a frame on wheels which you walk with. It's to help you walk, it's to give you the balance and stability. It has a chair so you can sit down whenever you need to while you're walking. So the number one thing is, if you want a rollator and a wheelchair together, if you want the flexibility to get up and walk whenever you want, this is perfect. If you want that flexibility, if you want both items and you want to have them both with you wherever you go, a 2-in-1 is the perfect solution. That's the reason why I take this over the traditional wheelchair every time. I love how flexible it is. I love that if someone pushes me to a place, I can then get out and walk around the place, or if I walk somewhere and I run out of energy, I can sit down and have someone push me. I don't have to commit to either walking or sitting in the wheelchair. I can choose as I go, as I feel, depending on the situation. That's the biggest reason to get the Rollz Motion over a traditional wheelchair. If you don't see yourself doing that, if you don't change your mind a lot, if you don't go on outings where you are likely to do both, then it's not necessary. If when you go out, you always use either a wheelchair or a rollator, but never back and forth, you never feel like getting up when you're in the wheelchair and you never feel like being pushed when you're walking around, then you don't need something like this. I think that the key to this is if you like to change the method while you're going, while you're out and about, the flexibility is really important for me. This is really useful. But if you don't care about that, you don't want to change, you just want to pick one before you leave the house and stick with it, you can just go with a traditional wheelchair and then maybe also get yourself a cheap rollator on the side and just use them both interchangeably, pick the one you want to go with. Or I guess if you've got a huge car and you can fit them both in, maybe you don't need the specialty thing like this. But if you do what I do, which is I live in the city, so I will have a friend come over, they'll push me into the city in the wheelchair, then I'll get up, I'll change it into a rollator, I'll wander about the city, I'll have a look at the shops, do whatever we're doing, and when I run out of energy, I'll sit back down and they'll push me again, and then when we finish, they'll push me home as well. That type of thing is perfect for a 2-in-1. But if you don't do that type of thing, then I guess it's not necessary. In my experience, this is the way that I like to work when I go out. I want to be up and down, I want to be walking when I want to walk, and I want to be sat when I want to sit. I very much want to be changing what I'm doing, like quite frequently. I get tired, I sit down, I get bored, I want to stand up. I like to have the freedom. I used to do this same thing with the traditional chair, and let me tell you, it doesn't really work, at least not with this exact chair, though this wheelchair is good at being a wheelchair. As soon as you get out of it and you try and use it as a rollator, it's not good, which is, I mean, it's not the chair's fault, that's not what it's for. I'd get bored of sitting down, I'd be in a shop, I'd want to look at something, so I'd stand up and I'd, walk around and hold onto the handles. The problem with a chair that's designed in the way that this one is designed is that the weight of the human in it is really important. When there's nobody sat in it, you can't put any weight through the handles because the whole thing tips. So it's not functional as a rollator, it's not functional for walking because it's not designed for it. But if you wanted to do both, sit and walk, it doesn't really work. So what I used to do is I'd get up, I'd use my stick instead of walking with it, and then I'd kind of like abandon it, like somewhere in the shop or wherever we were. I'd just kind of leave it somewhere and then walk with the stick because it just didn't work to walk with. It didn't provide any security, any support. I couldn't lean on it for stability. It really doesn't work for that function. And you might think, well, what if you had, a friend sit in it and then it would be leanable? And it totally is leanable if you have a friend sat in it, but I could then barely push it because then you have to push someone's whole body weight. So it doesn't really work as a rollator because it isn't one. But I think it really depends on what you are looking for. If you are looking for the flexibility to stand up or sit down, then a 2-in-1 is just brilliant. But if you don't care about it, then I would say don't bother with the extra cost. There is an extra cost, which I think is an important thing to say here. The Rollz Motion 2-in-1 rollator is expensive. It's a lot more expensive than just buying any old, good, perfectly fine wheelchair. I'm sure you could get a general wheelchair and a general rollator for significantly less than you can buy this for. And the reason to buy this instead of two things is, like I said, is that flexibility, that being able to decide what you want on the spot and not having to pre-decide. I think there's kind of no way of saying whether it's worth it or not. I think it really depends on how you would use it. Though, not to say that this isn't expensive, because in money, this is, any mobility aid is expensive, but in the scheme of mobility aids, this traditional wheelchair was very cheap and the 2-in-1 was less so. Though still on the scale of mobility aids, custom and all the special things you can get, we're still very much at the cheap end, but this is a lot more money, which I think is important to note. One of the things I said earlier when I was talking about how I was looking for a wheelchair was that I had on my list of must-haves was self-propel wheels. This was absolutely like 100% necessary on my wheelchair like want list. Like I had to have the self-propel wheels. I wasn't going to take anything that didn't have it. Fast forward a couple of years to this. The Rollz Motion doesn't have self-propel wheels, and it is, I would say, one of two gripes I have with it. So the lack of self-propel wheels I find slightly annoying. I think I have no idea whether it would be like physically possible to add self-propel wheels to it. I assume not. I assume they'd get in the way of the Rollator functionality, but I still kind of want them because when you're in the wheelchair, you can't move it unless you put your feet down and kind of scrabble on the ground, which isn't very effective, and also it's not very dignified. I think that is something to be aware of if you're likely to be using the wheelchair most of the time, especially when you go out. If you're not like me and a kind of a hop up and wander about for a bit and sit down and hop up and sit down, and if you don't really do that, then self-propel wheels will be really important, because being able to move yourself, being able to have that agency that comes with the self-propel wheels is really useful. And when I go out in the Rollz Motion, I get agency and I get that feeling of being able to maneuver myself from getting up and using the Rollator functionality. But if you don't really get out of the chair, if you don't really do that, then you're going to find yourself in a wheelchair without self-propel wheels, meaning that you won't be able to maneuver yourself. You won't be able to look at what you want to look at in a shop. You won't be able to move yourself anywhere. And I find that when you can't move yourself, it feels very limiting. You can get a fairly cheap wheelchair with self-propelled wheels, and I would say that if you're likely to be wheelchairing when you're out and about over walking, then self-propelled wheels I think are really important and should be, I think, quite high up on the list of things that you are looking for, because not being able to look at what you want to look at, having to follow what someone else's brain thinks is what we should be doing is kind of annoying. You don't realize how important it is to have your own ability to self-determine in these very small little ways until someone else is determining things, and they're really annoying. No matter how much you enjoy your family and friends, you'll never be more annoyed with them than you are in a shop when they just keep looking at the things that they want to look at and not the things that you want to look at. Can't describe it. Most infuriating thing in the universe. One of those things, it doesn't matter, but you find yourself really annoyed, or at least I do. So being able to have that control is really important. If I could add self-propel wheels to the Rollz Motion, I so would. I would do it in a heartbeat. Even if it made it slightly clunkier, which it might, I would still 100% like that to be a possibility. There's probably some like technical reason why they don't do it, but it's on my wish list anyway. My other gripe about the Rollz Motion, my only other problem with it that gets in the way of my user experience, is the tip functionality. The traditional wheelchair, the tip is so much better. It's so much easier to tip this traditional than the 2-in-1. I think it's something to do with the placement of the levers and also the huge self-propel wheels that makes this just like tip over so easily, and not in a fall back way, but like the huge wheels that makes it tip so easily, so that curbs are a lot easier in the traditional than the Rollz 2-in-1. They do have the little foot levers. You can tip it. People find it harder. People to push find the tipping in this much more difficult. It's harder to get it to go up as high. It's harder to get the, I guess, momentum because the levers are shorter. So curbs are more difficult in this more like specialty piece of equipment than the traditional wheelchair. And I guess it depends how accessible and even your home is, your city, your town, wherever you spend most of the time. But I spend my time in a very old city that's very uneven, constantly getting to curbs, and then people kind of like, there's like lots of faffing and like trying to get it. That's one of the things that I think limits me from saying this is the perfect thing and I couldn't improve on it and it's the light of my life. And while I do love this and I do think it's great and it really does help me a lot and makes my life easier, it's not perfect. And that is one of the big things of I spend a lot of time like sitting there while people like try and do curb, and it's kind of like annoying. And you could argue that's the fault of the city, not the chair. And while I do agree that it is the fault of the city, I would also say that cities are like that, and unfortunately the world is not smooth. So mobility aids have to know that that's going to happen and be able to deal with it. And it can, like, I'm not saying that it can do the curbs. We'd get up over the curbs and we'd fine, but it's not as seamless as it used to be when I used the traditional wheelchair, where it was much easier. I think it was just much more seamless, tip me and then get me out the curb than it is at the moment. In terms of more surface things, both of these actually come in a pink option. I didn't get it for this one on the basis the pink era was fairly new and I wasn't entirely certain if it was going to last. I think it's lasting, very much into pink still, and so I did get this one in the pink and I'm very happy with it. I think in terms of the aesthetic, they kind of have a different aesthetic. The big wheel gives you more opportunity to DIY some kind of decoration, whereas the Rollz themselves are quite pretty, I think, for mobility aids. I think the aesthetics is very much up to personal preference, and I think neither of them are particularly ugly, though you can get very ugly wheelchairs. But I think for both of them, there's lots of accessories you can get. Rollz has a whole range of accessories, but I also think you can DIY a lot of accessories, like my walking stick holder that I made for the Rollz. Honestly, I think there's pros and cons to both, and I think the biggest pros for the traditional is the big wheels, how easy it is to use, and the price. Honestly, I think it depends on your budget a lot of what is going to be worth it for you. I think if this is in your budget, if this is a price you're willing to pay for the Rollz, I would say it's really good. I'm really pleased that I have it. I use it all the time. I find it very easy to transition from one state to another. I like it as a wheelchair. I like it as a rollator. I have it folded up in my flat. It folds up really narrow and small. It's very non-obtrusive. The traditional wheelchair doesn't fold up as small, but still not like hugely bulky. So I think it very much comes down to price and what you are looking for. If you want the flexibility, this may be worth it for you. And if you have no interest in the flexibility, you don't care about that, then I wouldn't buy it, because that's what it's for. That's where it really stings, I think, is going around shops, going around towns when you want to be in and out. And for me, I always choose the Rollator. I always choose the Rollz Motion Rollator because I love the flexibility of both, and I find it really annoying that I can't stand up and use the traditional wheelchair in the way that I want to. I want to hold on the handles, I want to lean on it, and I want to walk, and I can't. And for me, that is the biggest reason why this has been languishing in my parents' garage for a year, because it just doesn't have the flexibility. And if the Rollz came out with a big wheeled version, and if the Rollz ever came out with a bigger wheeled version with an improved tip, then all of my prayers would be answered and it would be perfect. Currently, it's not quite perfect, but I think it works really well for me and my situation, especially with my energy issues being like my number one thing. I run out of energy and I sit down. I rest for an amount of time and then I stand up again. That is the perfect form factor for me and my situation. I hope that's helped you a bit. I hope you can see how your situation and what you're looking for would fit into each of these mobility aids and which one would be right for you. Let me know if you have one of these two types or if you have a completely different type altogether and what you think is good about it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!